This is part two of a series of videos I'm doing on the different table types within Microsoft Fabric. Just some of the different table types. It's not an exhaustive list by any means. So in part one, we looked at what exactly are managed tables, when and why you would use them. In this part two, we're going to be looking at external tables. So let's get straight into this. External tables, as the name suggests, are tables which reference data which can live outside of Fabric's managed storage. So they can live within the file section of your lakehouses, or the data can live somewhere completely external in another data lake elsewhere. And you can reference that data and create tables on top of that data to explore that data. So looking at this, where does a table live? External storage, you specify, and as I say, it could be ADLS Gen 2 or the locations. External tables operate on the format of metadata only, so that is the structure, the schema of the table only, but Fabric is not responsible for the underlying Parquet files. If you ever drop a external table, again, the table will be dropped, but the data or the associated files which feed the table do not get dropped. They will remain intact, and you can access external tables through Spark and the SQL endpoint and across shareable engines. So when might you use external tables? Well, generally they are used for bronze and raw ingestion layers. So if you're pulling data from source, which is sat somewhere in ADLS or even within files, it's usually noticed that external tables are generally used within the bronze layer of the medallion architecture. That's not a hard and fast rule. It can be used anywhere, but generally speaking, that's what we see in practice. So let me jump over to Microsoft Fabric now, and we'll walk through the demo to build out an external table. So here we are in Microsoft Fabric, and I'm inside my Byte Analytics demo workspace, which if you've watched and followed part one, you will know what we've created here. Inside this workspace, I have a notebook called Setup Demo Table. So let's go ahead and click on that. And in part one, we created a managed table using this very notebook here. I'm going to run this through again, but this time we're going to focus on creating an external table. But the first thing that we need to do is we note here that this notebook is connected to a particular lakehouse, and there are two lakehouses added as potential data sources to this notebook. I don't want any of those. We're going to start from scratch. So let's go over to our workspace and create a new lakehouse. And let's call this LH table types. Now I've given it the name of no schema, and I'm going to untick the lakehouse schemas for now. And the reason for that is external tables are not currently supported by lakehouses which enforce schema. So I'm going to go ahead, untick schema, and I'm specifically calling this lakehouse no schema. Let's go ahead and click on create. Right, so we now have a fresh new lakehouse. Let's just close out these messages. And we can see that there are no tables and no files currently inside of this lakehouse, and that's perfect. So let's jump back over to our workspace and go back over to our notebook. And let's add our newly created lakehouse as a data source. So let's go over to the OneLake catalog. And we can see our new lake house no schema is at the top. Let's select that and connect. So it's been added inside of this notebook now, but even though it's been added, the current notebook is still defaulting to this lake house here. So what I need to do is go ahead and click on the three dots here and set as default lake house. And now what will happen is that anything that executes inside of this notebook will affect only the default lakehouse which we have selected here, and it's got this pin icon here which you can see that's telling us that's where the changes are going to take effect. So let me just go back over to the workspace and let's just correct the typo here for consistency. Perfect. Let's go back over to our setup demo tables notebook. And now let's run this through. So I'm just going to refresh this screen once. And you can see we've picked up the correction to the typo here as well now. So let's execute the cells one at a time. And now that we have created the managed tables in the new Lakehouse, we've actually run through the notebook and we've created the data frames which we need. But the focus here now is this cell here, this particular cell, which you can see here. And very quickly, what we're going to do is write out the contents of the sales data frame in the overwrite mode. The format is going to be Delta. But notice here we are specifying where we want to save the files, the Parquet files which Fabric is going to write out. We are able to specify where they will be written. So let's go ahead and execute this cell here. Okay, and now that's done after a few seconds. So let's jump back over to our Lakehouse and see what changes have been made. And you can see within this new lakehouse, which we just created, we have our three managed tables, which we don't necessarily need. They were part of the notebook. But if you look here under the file section, we now have this folder called external source. And if I expand that, we have another folder called sales order _ext for external. And within this folder, you can see we have the Parquet files, which Fabric has written out for us. So at the moment, we have just specified and saved the files down to the files location within a lakehouse. We still don't have a table, but let's go ahead and do that next. So let's go back over to our notebook. Now this cell here is what is actually going to create the external table. So here I'm using the create table command and I'm specifying the name of the external table, which is going to be sales order _external. It's going to use the Delta format and the location is what I'm going to specify here. And that is the location of the files which we saw a moment ago. So let me go back and point you to how we obtain this location. That is the ABFSS file location. So if I go back over into my Lakehouse, no schema, and you can see the external source folder is available. And let's click on the three dots for the sales order external folder. Let's click on properties. And if I move down here, you will be able to see the ABFS file path. And that's the file path which I've copied and I moved it into the notebook in this cell here. So we're using that location, and using that location, we're going to create an external table on top of the files. So let's go ahead and run this cell now. Okay, so after 9 seconds, that cell has now completed. Let's go back to our lakehouse. And I want to draw your attention to the tables here. At the moment, we have customer, product, and sales order. Let's just refresh the window. And we now also have a sales order _ external table. And this is the external table which is referencing the files held in the files area of this lakehouse. So how do we know this is an external table aside from its naming? So if I go over to the table, click on the three dots, choose properties, and you can see here the table type is external. So that is the key giveaway, which is telling us the type of table which is being used here. Now, one of the fundamental differences of an external table is that even if I delete the table, if I drop the table, the files will be intact. They will remain as they are. That's quite different from a managed table, where if you delete the managed table, the files and the associated Delta Parquet files all get wiped out. So in order to prove this, let's close out this window. And what we can do is click on the three dots and choose to delete this table. and it will ask us if we want to confirm that. Let's delete. So now that external table has been deleted, and if I refresh the current window, the files under sales order underscore external are still valid and they are still available. So that is the key distinction between a managed and an external table. So let's test this another way. Let's go ahead and open up the OneLake File Explorer. And this is where we can verify that our files actually exist. And in here, let's go into the Byte Analytics demo workspace, into the LH table types no schema lakehouse, which is what we created in this very demo. We can see the file section, and in the file section, we can see the structure mirrors the structure we see here. And inside of the folder, we can see the exact same files we see inside of Fabric. And if I go into tables, let's come back out of this. Let's go into tables. We can see we only have customer, product, and sales order table. So the physical table itself has been deleted because that was metadata only. And the files which were used by the table are completely separate and held here in the file section. So that is one of the biggest distinctions between a managed table and an external table inside of Fabric. Hopefully now you'll have a baseline understanding of what the key difference and behavior is of each table, and you'll be able to decide when you should be using each table and which table might be more suited to a given scenario in your case. Hope that was useful for you. Thank you for watching.